MovieWeb.com.
First question is, you guys premiered this at South by Southwest, right?
Right.
Now I'm wondering, have you noticed a difference between the younger viewers who have seen the film and the older viewers who have seen the film and what they've taken away from it?
No, I think it's been pretty much the same across the board, I have to admit. I haven't seen much difference. In what do you mean, in what sense?
Well, I just think, like in Texas, since it premiered in Texas, and this kind of takes place in Texas, if they're more open to having the death penalty changed and abolished as to some what older people's perceptions of it are. Like if there's a difference there.
You know, I don't know that. I don't know what the statistics say, but you know, I think politically, in most respects in this country, being young doesn't necessarily mean being liberal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it ever was true, you know, the '60s it tends to get overstated because there were certainly plenty of young people who were not, you know, really liberal in the '60s too. But that's sort of our perception, is all the young people were hippies and liberals and their parents were stuffy conservatives. But I think if it's certainly true nowadays that politically people, I think if anything, the older you are, you tend to be, I think statistically a little bit more liberal than young people, which is not to say that there are a lot of young people out there that are really trying to change the world in those ways, but
it's interesting,
you know,
from going to smaller screenings, you know, where it's advocacy groups stuff, they tend to be older people.
so I don't think it, you know.
You know, though the film has also been shown on a lot of college campuses, you know.
I don't think you can
screenings,
characterize
it's
it. I
hard
think
to-
that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's no way to characterize it because the audience that we're getting, you know, a lot of times the people that come to see a film like this in a film festival setting, in general, it tends to be a more liberal audience. You know, film festival going audience tends to be more liberal in general, I think. So you're not going to get the kind of genuine cross-section of America at a film festival that you're going to get at a multiplex, let's say.
Now, you guys set out to make a film about Carlos. Is that correct?
No, I don't know how that rumor got around.
Yeah.
Well, Pastor Pickett told me that.
Well, we got to correct him on that.
Yeah.
We always wanted to make a film about Pastor Pickett, but from the very first meeting, when we were told about Carlos, the Chicago Tribune approached us and said, you know, we think there's a really great and interesting film to be made about this investigation that we're doing into Carlos de Luna, because it really is looking like he could very well have been innocent, and he was not only convicted, he was executed. What do you think? We thought that was an interesting story, absolutely, and a very important story, which is why it has such a prominent place in the movie. But it wasn't really until they mentioned Pastor Pickett in passing and said there was this minister who believed he was innocent, who was with 95 men who were put to death, who was with the first guy executed by lethal injection, and who would come home at night and record on his little tape recorder, that we really thought there's a film there. And it was really, from the get-go, we thought Pastor Pickett's story would be the spine of our story. And the more we found out about him, the more we were convinced that that was the way to go, and that Carlos's significance would grow, by virtue of the fact that he was such an important inmate to Pickett.
Yeah, I think that because he was so haunted by Carlos, it's possible that Reverend Pickett feels that way. But really, the film is about Reverend Pickett.
Well, and for him, the film grew out of his involvement with Maury and Steve and the Chicago Tribune doing a story about Carlos de Luna. So for him, from his point of view, the film grew out of the investigation of Carlos de Luna, but that was the Tribune's investigation. Our interest in the film from the very beginning was primarily, it was in both, but the primary interest was Pastor Pickett. We would not have done this film if we weren't telling Pastor Pickett's story.
Well, how difficult was it to balance that narrative between Carlos's story and Pastor Pickett's story when you got all the footage together and started editing this?
Well, I think that was one of the real trickiest parts of putting this film together, because I think that you could clearly just make a film about either story. You could make a film about Carlos de Luna and what happened to him, or you could certainly make a film just about Pastor Pickett's life journey and ministering to those 95 men. But I think we felt that trying to find a way to tell both stories would make it, in a sense, a stronger film, and that's because Carlos was so important to Pickett that we felt like if we could, in this film, eventually come to one inmate who was the most significant for Pickett, and we could find a way to bring him to life. And the Tribune's investigation, in essence, helped to do that for us, because now, with the investigation of Carlos's conviction and execution, that story very much came back into Pickett's life in a very direct way in the present. He was executed 18 years ago, but this investigation was happening now. So it allowed us to bring Carlos to life in Pickett's life, but also to show how the death of this one man, this execution of this one man, had such a profound impact, not just on Pickett, but on other people, like Rose, like Karen Boudry, the reporter, and like, by extension, somebody like Fred Allen, who was, part of the tie-down team.
No, he said he's destroyed all the tapes. Did you guys get a chance to listen to them, or did you go through them to pick out what tapes to listen to?
I don't think he told you he destroyed the tapes. He
That's
says
what
he
he
doesn't
did.
have them anymore.
He doesn't have.
Oh, it made it sound like he just got...
No, we've listened to, the majority of the tapes, and the tapes exist. They're just not with him now.
They're gone. Okay, well, that's interesting to know. So was there any hesitation ever from Pickett about some of the stuff you guys wanted to talk about, or was he open about every aspect of what he'd gone through?
Yeah. Go ahead. Well, I think he was remarkably open, but he's not a naturally open person. He's witness the family discussion that you see in the film around the dinner table, where they finally felt like they talked to him about some stuff that they had never spoken to him about. So he's not a naturally open individual. He tends to be a pretty stoic and closed individual, which I think you see pretty clearly in the film. So I think the process of making the film was one of constantly and gently sort of prodding and pulling back some of those layers of defense that he had built up over the years, which really, frankly, helped him get through it,
If you think he wrote a book within these walls, a memoir, and in the memoir he doesn't even mention the tapes. So I think those tapes was one, just letting us listen to those tapes and having them in the film and dealing with them was just one more step forward that he was willing to go in terms of really examining his life and opening up to us.
Okay, well, I don't have very much more time left, but I want to ask one question. Do you guys like the idea of this museum we see in the film with all of the paraphernalia from the prison? Do you guys think that's a good idea to have that stuff in there? Because he kind of had different ideas about that, like from the first injection in '82.
Well, I think the prison museum is pretty great, because it's, first of all, it is an official museum in which the Texas Department of Corrections is part of its reason for being, and I think that the museum, through the guidance of Willett, that is the museum director, who is an ex-warden, I think the museum is remarkably even-handed in its presentation of the prison system, and particularly the death penalty in Texas. To have exhibits devoted to Carla Faye Tucker and to the protests against her execution and other executions. In the film, you see a photo exhibit that they had there, where they had people like Rose, family members of the executed, portrayed and shown in a very sympathetic light.
Guilty and innocent.
Yeah, it really speaks, I think, to their commitment to wanting this to be a genuine museum and not just, you know, something that props up the Texas Department of Corrections.
And I think for that area too, it's important because, you know, so many people have come from, you know, their grandfathers worked in the prison, you know, system, and you know, it's a family business there. I think there's, what, 17 prisons within that area?
Well, there's 8 within,
Huntsville, and then 17, I think, total overall within, you know, 100 miles of there.
yeah.
And, you know, it really is something that is a part of their history. And I think, you know, Jim Willett's been doing a very even-handed, you know, job of showing what went on in the prisons.
Okay.
What did Pastor Pickett say?
He just didn't understand why they had some of that paraphernalia in there from like the first injection, and why they had that on display.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he would feel that way. I could see why he feels that way, because he feels like it's the wrong thing, we shouldn't be doing it, and maybe he feels like people shouldn't see that. But on the other hand, he has said that the best remedy
Yeah.
for people who are for the death penalty would be to actually witness an actual execution. So in a way, I think that the museum is doing a public service by being very clear and straightforward about what's involved.
I mean, when I first saw that paraphernalia, you know, that they used with Charlie Brooks, I got chills because there was something so, what's the word for it, almost amateurish about the way it looked and how it was put together, and, you know, it made you feel as though that it really illuminated a lot of what his story was, you know, that Reverend Pickett told us about how, you know, it was the first time they had ever done anything like this. They were making up procedures as they go. They just didn't know. And I felt that came through very loud and clear when I saw that.
It's like when you see when doctors do, you know, surgeries where they have tools that look like power tools, you know, and you think,
you
there's
know,
got to be a more sophisticated way to do that.
where it's back to the barber shop in medieval times kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.